The Lido in Paris is aflame with celebrities on the Champs-Élysées for the opening of a new and zesty show. Everybody who is anybody is there. The Duke of Windsor heads the notables, which include Michelle Morgan and the famous mustache of Salvador Dali and veteran Maurice Chevalier. The show itself scores an instant hit for the festive season, as well as the dancing which follows. Author Francois Sagan sets the pace for an occasion that is truly Parisian, truly festive, and in every sense, a success.
Science and technology policy, lacking that female diversity, not asking for a handout, just thinking about how to fix the drought. Your own science proves it, hon. We bring the heat. Inclusion makes a brighter sector for us all, for our benefit. Let's bring the lights out and shine. Come on, equality begins with you and me. We're making new history, equally, all in one sector. Look at what we can be.
Nice of you to join us again. Welcome to episode 2, The Deep Dive. Today we will be examining the issues of gender bias in education and their relation to the lack of women within the science and technology policy sector. I'm getting hungry myself, so let's join the science and technology policy lady in the cafeteria. Last lunch hour, the main dish was science and technology policy. What is it?
Science and technology policy is when the STEM sector, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, meets policy making.
Why is it important?
Science and technology policies affect you personally as well as your community, your country, and your global standing. For instance, some countries have policies that include internet surveillance or facial recognition. This directly affects a country's citizens personally, as well as their community and country, and sets a standard globally for their stance on the issue of surveillance and censorship.
How does having a more inclusive science and technology policy sector with an emphasis on more women benefit us all?
Science benefits from more diverse perspectives working together on an issue, and the data shows that more collective, diverse ideas, rather than each individual having a high IQ, is conducive to best solving problems. Harnessing the untapped human potential of fully trained and credentialed girls and women in science and as leaders would not only boost collective intelligence in scientific and technological pursuits, as well as solving the world's problems, but would also help eradicate gender equality and increase economic growth.
This lunch hour, we'll be digging into the reasons why we are lacking so many women in science and technology policy and the plan to help.
It is important to understand that this systemic issue is very complex, but two main issues tie into the problem of lack of women in science and technology policy, which are education and gender bias.
Let's talk about education first.
This will include education regarding girls and women in STEM, and also girls and women in politics, as well as the education and opportunities that lead into careers within the political sphere. We will also discuss equal access to basic education. Another important aspect is education surrounding the subject of why there are a lack of girls and women in these sectors, politics and STEM, that lead into science and technology policy, resulting in underrepresentation of women in the science and technology policy sector itself. This means understanding gender bias and the role it can play in an educational setting, especially in subjects that feed into male-dominated sectors. The issues of gender bias and education often overlap, even if that is not the intent of the educators and administrations. This includes education for the educators and those in charge of curricula and in administrative roles, as well as the students. As with any systemic issue, if there aren't changes within the system itself, the work to combat the issue will only create superficial change.
It's like if you take vitamins every day like you're supposed to, but continue to eat poorly, you will continue to have health issues because you are not tackling the issue at its source. The good news is that basic education for girls is on the rise globally.
The last 25 years has seen a steady rise in girls' access to education around the world. In 1998, there were 143 million girls of secondary school age out of school, compared to 127 million boys. Today, 97 million girls and 102 million boys of secondary school age are out of school. Yet, for many children, just being at school does not mean they are learning. By 2030, some 880 million children will not be on track to develop the skills they need to succeed in the workforce. This means that millions of children and young people are not developing the skills they need to successfully transition to adulthood. We are facing a learning crisis, which is leading to a skills crisis. For girls and women, this crisis includes difficulty accessing quality learning opportunities in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM subjects traditionally ascribed to and dominated by boys and men, and lower levels of achievement in digital skills. Education systems have allowed gender divides to be perpetuated and to disproportionately affect the most marginalized girls, especially girls who are Black, Indigenous, and young women of color. While girls tend to outperform boys in reading skills in most regions, they continue to be underrepresented amongst top performers in STEM subjects, and women continue to be underrepresented in the STEM workforce. This is a tremendous waste of talent and human potential. This is when gender bias and issues in education start to overlap. The underrepresentation of girls and women in STEM is deeply rooted in unequal gender norms that tell us that girls are not cut out for subjects that require problem solving and an inquisitive mind. Girls deserve to access an education that prepares them for the jobs of the future.
To give all girls opportunities to learn and excel, we need to reimagine STEM education as gender responsive in all classroom settings.
Gender responsive STEM education is an approach to teaching and learning with the transformative potential to deliver on the promise of the girls' education and empowerment agenda in the 21st century. By learning science, mathematics, technology, and engineering solutions in an integrated manner to solve real-world problems and to challenge gender inequality, children and young people improve their understanding of how things work and improve gender equitable use of digital technologies. And girls become equipped with scientific and technical knowledge and skills that they can apply to real-life contexts in ways that include agency and voice, strengthening their agency in terms of voice, participation, and decision-making over their own health, future, financial, and career choices, as well as social interactions. And also critical understanding, enabling them to critically understand social and environmental issues in the world around them, actively participate in debates to solve such problems, and propose relevant solutions. Regarding learning outcomes, this approach will help motivate them to learn and achieve at the highest levels, helping to close gender gaps in learning outcomes for STEM subjects and digital literacy. Additionally, it will help facilitate their transitions to employment and livelihoods in the context of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, in traditional STEM careers and jobs requiring STEM knowledge and skills developed in secondary education and technical training, as well as empower them to be innovators, entrepreneurs, and change makers. A lot of the issues concerning gender bias lead to girls not having equal access to STEM education, which contributes to understanding issues that leaders need to problem solve. STEM education helps provide the skills necessary to excel in the political sphere.
These issues all overlap and directly affect the number of women in science and technology policy.
Girls need an education that goes beyond literacy and numeracy, that equips them with the tools to equally and actively participate in solving the complex challenges our world faces. With technological change accelerating and economies rapidly changing to face the effects of the recent COVID-19 global pandemic, failure to invest in girls' STEM education and empower girls and women to participate in the digital revolution will not only forfeit the economic potential of half the population, but exclude girls and women from world-class digital learning solutions and a whole range of new occupations that require STEM-related skills. The greatest challenge for closing the economic gender gap is women's underrepresentation in emerging roles, especially those in STEM fields. Eliminating these persistent gender disparities requires a concerted effort between governments, private sector, researchers, communities, and girls and young women themselves. Efforts to prepare girls and young women to equally participate in the workforce, including in STEM fields, need to be accelerated, which is why the issues of both gender bias and education need to be understood and eradicated. Education isn't just about availability for girls and women within these arenas. It is also important for us to all be aware of the effects of gender bias, especially as these girls and women navigate through their educational careers and into the workforce. Even if we are not aware of our biases, they do exist and can cause harm if not addressed.
A study was done on the presence of gender bias within recommendation letters.
To determine whether implicit gender bias exists in the urology residency application process, linguistic differences were compared in letters of recommendation submitted for male and female applicants. Of 460 letters evaluated, letters for male applicants are written in a more authentic tone compared to letters written for female applicants. Letters written for male applicants contain significantly more references to personal drive, work, and power than letters written for female applicants. Significant linguistic differences exist among letters of recommendation written for men and women applying into urology, suggesting that gender bias may permeate resident recruitment. These differences may affect the likelihood of women matching into urology. This isn't the only research that backs these claims up. Female postdoctoral fellowship applicants are half as likely as their male counterparts to receive glowing recommendation letters, according to a study by researchers at Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. The researchers also found that both male and female scientists tend to write stronger recommendation letters for men than for women. The findings add more evidence of implicit or unconscious bias that women are perceived as weaker in the sciences than men. 1,224 recommendation letters redacted of personal information were analyzed that were written between 2007 and 2012 by 1,101 researchers from 54 countries. This shows that gender bias is a global issue concerning women in these sectors that lead into science and technology policy. The reason I am focusing on gender bias and letters of recommendation is because this shows that even when intentions are good and individuals are trying to help, gender biases of those within systems that girls and women are navigating can still work against them, which is why it is so important for us as individuals, and especially those in leadership roles, to be aware of implicit biases and understand how they work.
What is an implicit bias?
Research on implicit bias suggests that people can act on the basis of prejudice and stereotypes without intending to do so. Most well-known research has focused on implicit biases toward members of socially stigmatized groups, such as people who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, women, and the LGBTIQA+ community. For example, imagine Frank, who explicitly believes that women and men are equally suited for careers outside the home. Despite his explicitly egalitarian belief, Frank might nevertheless behave in any number of biased ways, from distrusting feedback from female coworkers to hiring equally qualified men over women. Part of the reason for Frank's discriminatory behavior might be an implicit gender bias.
What is important to understand about implicit biases is that just because you have them, and everyone does, it does not mean that you are unfair or incapable of making ethical choices. I myself took an implicit association test for gender and science, and the results were surprising if you don't understand how implicit association tests work.
An implicit association test is a psychological test whose objective is to reveal unconscious attitudes, automatic preferences, and hidden biases by measuring the time that takes an individual to classify concepts into two categories. If the participant reacts quickly in classifying one concept into one category, it is said the relationship between the concept and the category is familiar, frequent, or inherent in the mind of the individual. That is, the concept and the category are mentally associated. For example, if a participant reacts significantly faster when pairing the word success with skinny, category A, than with fat, category B, success and skinny are implicitly more associated, more interconnected in the participant's mind. This is what is important to keep in mind. It is not necessarily that this participant consciously believes that skinny people are more successful, but that her quicker response is to associate the two was a product of the environment in which she lives in. Starting from when we are young to where we are now, so much of our input is from external sources: school, work, friends, family, the media, social media, etc. And the more familiar you are with a concept, the more likely you are to create an implicit bias. So, if this participant has been surrounded by the concept that skinny people are more successful than people who are overweight, whether it be through the media, beliefs within the family, or advertisements on her social media, her implicit bias is more likely to form, even if she isn't consciously aware of it. This is the scary power of stereotypes, especially those hidden in humor and entertainment. Even if these are false narratives, they do hold power in existing and being consumed. This is why it is so important to be consciously aware of our implicit biases so that we are cautious they don't affect our decision making, especially when in leadership roles. I took the implicit association test for gender in science, and even though I spend the majority of my time throughout the week researching and writing about my PhD focus, which is gender equality in science and technology policy, my implicit association test showed that I still more commonly associate men with science because my brain has more frequently made the connection between men and scientists due to my surroundings and external influences. Now, I obviously do not believe that men are more suited to be in science, but this test has made me that much more aware of how I internalize the environment around me.
This is why it is so important to not only be aware of what we are putting into our body physically, but also mentally. What can help right now?
Much of the responsibility lies in the government, organizations, and institutions, both domestically and internationally, and in both the private and public sectors, which we will cover next lunch hour with our episode, The Big Picture. But what we do individually is just as important. Understanding these issues and our own implicit biases individually helps us become role models. Being an ally to feminists who advocate for gender equality and gender equity, or becoming one yourself, sets an example. If you are a woman interested in being in a leadership role or taking up a STEM hobby, this also sets a precedent for young girls to look up to. Role models and representation can be incredibly influential, even if they are fictitious characters. Remember the X-Files with Mulder and Scully? Scully went on to influence an entire generation in her role as a woman in STEM. The fictitious FBI agent inspired a generation of young women to pursue careers in STEM, a phenomenon that even has its own name, the Scully Effect. It's been noted in STEM circles for years. In 2018, 21st Century Fox tasked the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media, a nonprofit research organization, with finding out whether there was any hard truth to the phenomenon. The researchers surveyed more than 2,000 women to examine what they thought about STEM and how they perceived Scully. Among the women who are familiar with the character, 50% say Scully increased their interest in STEM, and 43% say that they considered working in STEM because of her. The survey also found women who watched more X-Files episodes had an increased likelihood of working in STEM fields. With medium and heavy viewers, 50% were more likely to have worked in a STEM field because of how she was depicted. And among women who are familiar with the character, 91% said that she was a role model for girls and women. 2/3 of the women surveyed that work in STEM today say Dana Scully served as their role model. That influence was from a character on television. Imagine how much influence someone in real life could have on young women.
Seeing you as a leader and seeing you do science helps young women become interested in these subjects. You too could be the next glamorous science and technology policy lady. Individual interests, collectively, does create change. Well, I know my brain is as full as my stomach now, so I look forward to seeing you next lunch hour. Facts for lunch from a real lady.
Science and technology policy, lacking in that female diversity, not asking for a handout, just thinking about how to fix the drought. Your own science proves it, we bring the heat. Inclusion makes a brighter sector for us all, for our benefit. Let's bring the lights out and shine. Come on, equality begins with you and me.